ultimately, like as a meta point, there's a general move from the analog world to the digital world. We have like Bitcoin is basically a video game currency that just has certain kind of rules that are enforced in the physical world, and it's worth, trillions of dollars. So I still think this whole Ready Player One kind of thing that maybe Axie gave us a preview of, like, will happen, but I have no idea on the timing of that.
All right, so we are doing a special consumer podcast as part of our thesis series. We are so glad to have ex-Messari analysts Mason and Kel with us here today. So Kel and Mason, how about we do just some quick introductions and then we'll get into some of the consumer topics.
Yeah, sure. Happy to kick things off. Yeah, I'm Mason Nystrom, Messari alum, joined initially as a research analyst, and then since then I've been investing in crypto, joined Variant, which is an early stage crypto fund, and then now I'm an investor at Pantera Capital.
What's up, everyone? I'm Kel, also a Messari alum. I wrote my first enterprise research piece under Mason right here, so happy to see a friendly face. Was there for about 3 years, and now just investing solo.
That first piece was a banger too. I think it was about art blocks.
It was a good time in generative art around summer 2021.
Very cool. So I just wanted to start off kind of high level. Looking back at 2024, like what were some of the trends that were most surprising to you? And maybe things that you didn't really think of, like either positively surprised you or kind of like going against theses you had. We can start with Mason and I'll kick it over to Cal.
Yeah, I think that, to put broadly speaking, meme coins have been the defining characteristic of the past year. I think that while meme coins have always been a thing in crypto, no one anticipated them to be or I didn't anticipate them to be as prominent as they were. And then obviously with the launch of Pump, that really catalyzed really just a new genre of meme coins. So that was very unexpected. The other unexpected trend that I would put in there was the social kind of FI category. So kind of the friend techs of the world, the fantasy.tops, even what was going on in 2024 with Farcaster, and a lot of the kind of initial activity there was unexpected. And I thought maybe some of that would continue, but obviously has fallen a little more, compared to where we saw it in the early beginnings of the year.
Yeah, I think I would double down on that. As much as I thought that memes could do well just as a function of their accessibility, I think even I was shocked to see, the persistence and magnitude of the meme trend, which is still ongoing. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. I think one thing I'll add too is the live streaming trend on Pump Fun in all of its flavorful forms, I'll say. That I did not think would really work at all. And that really permeated culture at large, right? I was seeing that random posts on Instagram talking about that. So
well, I was just going to ask both of you guys, because Kel, obviously you were super, super bullish on memes kind of going into 2024. How did you, once it actually hit 2024, you're seeing all this stuff pop off, how did your thesis on that evolve over time as the year went on?
I think at a certain point, it became clear that there was a lot of pent up demand to speculate on something, and it had no vehicle to do so. So as you're getting into, February, March, there's still no real compelling launches. There's this, populist sentiment about, the VCs, sorry, Mason, they're all dumping on our head and all this kind of stuff. So I think that just made it clear this is really going to go. I think what's become very interesting now that you're starting to actually see normal people get into crypto, is how much more variable their acceptance of memes actually is, right? We all thought that, normies will just love memes. That was the prevailing sentiment in Q1 of this year. It's really not the case. Most normies just think memes are scams, which they are. A lot of them are, right? So I think now we're seeing an opening of the window of what will perform well, where you still have some memes that people like, but now that there's a lot more fairly launched projects or just reasonably valued projects, a lot of that, so-called normie flow, it's just gone in a completely different direction. So that's kind of how it's developed over time, in my view.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's almost like we expected these people to come in and just be like, this industry is as completely nihilistic as we all believe it is, and nothing's happening. And then they came in and they were like, oh my God, like there's some really cool tech here. And even though they don't understand it, it's like people want to invest in tech, people want to invest in the future. So it's like they're kind of working their way up to that, but it's like it's very appealing to people who just come into the space. But yeah, Mason, what's your take on that, kind of how it developed over time? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like if we zoom out, there's a growing like propensity for people to want to bet and on anything that they can bet on. And one thing like crypto does really well is it lets you create assets and markets for anything you can imagine. And so meme coins are just like one iteration of that. I think that the other flavor of this that really captured the zeitgeist was Polymarket. And offering like election markets. And that kind of just showcases the demand for people to want to like express their viewpoints about something. Obviously, like Polymarket was like election based. There's some sports volumes. There's like some cultural stuff, but it turns out like the cultural asset that people wanted to mostly bet on was something like a meme coin, just because it is very organic and it's like kind of hard to replicate that in maybe a more defined market like a poly market structure. And so, yeah, it's just kind of how I see like the dichotomy of the different types of assets that are more consumer friendly that people want to express an opinion about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like Polymarket and Pumped Off Phone have kind of become news sources, like in their own way, both of them. And I think it is interesting how people see these like current events happening and they want to bet on some sort of either opinion, like binary opinion, or just like a continuation of a trend coming out. And I think with the meme coins, like obviously recently, and like Kel, you have written a lot about this. I know that Mason, you wrote about this very early. I think in 2023 is AI agents. So how do you guys see this developing? Mason, maybe you can start. I know that you've been on this for a long time and probably things have changed a lot within your thesis and what you've seen develop. And then we shoot it over to Kel, who just recently released some pretty cool stuff about agents.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my high level thesis for agents within crypto is that agents are like the first class citizens of blockchain networks. They, whether that's bots, whether that's more complex agents that we get over time. And so as that continues, and as the types of things that agents, the types of actions they can do become more complex, like that will increasingly account for more activity. What I did not envision, but I guess like in hindsight was inevitable, is that like the early agents would be more under the same vein of like speculation. And so in like maybe to draw like an analogy to last cycle of like DeFi summer, when you had a bunch of like food coins launched, like what were they like principally doing? It was like building these like new experimental primitives and people got really excited about them. We've had like a similar experiment within AI agents where we now have these AI agent frameworks. We have these agents on top of them that are kind of like these influencer agents, which are kind of like inherently, I don't want to say valueless, but like there's no like direct cash flows. It's just kind of akin to meme coins, but you still have these like base level primitives underneath them that are being like the foundation for something that might be able to stick around and produce those more complex agents on chain. But yeah, I know Kel has a lot of thoughts here too.
Yeah, I think you ultimately hit it right on the head, right? You have a lot of these projects that are almost like Trojan horse esque, where, there's potentially some very legit tech that is hidden underneath, like, it's hidden underneath just a veil of memes that, people like kind of laugh at and they pattern match to what they've seen most recently, which is, outright memes performing the best, right? So the big question on like a 2025 basis is how material is the tech of insert project? What is the like grand scope of it? How far can it go? Those will be the kingmaker or widowmaker questions to look forward to in the new year.
Yeah. So, yeah, given that you just dropped your massive AI agent piece, Cal, wondering if you could kind of go into some of your mental models and frameworks that you're using to evaluate these different AI agents, and how you see these technological aspects giving some of these agents a leg up over some of these other ones.
Yeah, so I think, there's a few projects that, for example, have deployed frameworks for people to develop agents that can do a variety of things. So if I take apart even just, that statement, the framework that you've deployed how accessible is it? Is it open source? Is it closed source? Is it just a promise? Like that's already a gradation of ways that one project can be better than another. Then like with that framework, what can you do with it? Can it only use OpenAI, or can it use 12 different models? Can it only operate agents on Solana, or can it operate on 10 different chains? Can it operate on one social media platform or 10 different social media platforms? Can you fine tune the personalities? Like all of this customizability, I guess would be the one word to kind of narrow that all into, kind of dictates a difference between something that's very vanilla versus, something that's the whole ice cream store, if you will.
Are you seeing any, like, not to get too much into a shill your bags moment, but I mean, which ones are you seeing in particular that really stand out to you? And like, where do you see that differentiation in them having that competitive edge?
Oh, I mean, just to give the example I've talked about the most, AI16Z's developed this Eliza OS, what they call it, which is, to my knowledge, the most used agent framework in crypto. And at this rate is probably one of the most used open source repos, I or otherwise, in crypto. So there are two metrics, both of which are fairly naive, but they tell us something that people have been looking at, which is GitHub stars and GitHub forks. I think the forks one is more interesting. And, we can look at something like Uniswap, which is, every chain that's ever existed, for the most part, has had a Uniswap fork on it, or several Uniswap forks. And in the span of 1 month, AI16Z's Eliza is already at like half the number of forks that Uniswap v2 is at. And Uniswap v2 has been public for almost 5 years now. So when you see that kind of rapid growth, it tells you something, right? It doesn't tell me, the future of the internet is going to be built on Eliza, or whatever the case may be, but it's definitely a promising sign, especially on a relative basis where most other projects, if they have any usage at all, it's very small.
Yeah. And so I guess, like, obviously this is very much like kind of speculation looking into the future, but like, I guess one of the things I'm interested in is like, if we were having this conversation a year from now, what would we be saying about agents? Like, what do you think that things that will develop over 2025 will be that will be like a, central topic of conversation when we talk about agents? I don't know, Mason, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how capable agents become. Because like ideally under kind of like Kel's framework, like the best framework is going to be the one that produces the most capable agents. And that could be from a variety of viewpoints, whether it's like capability of being able to do like things on chain. So maybe like how many things can like the agent invest in, and like how can they build a portfolio? Like that's one like framework. Another framework is like how can you build agents that are more specialized such that like they're producing music, they're producing IP, and like how good are those like works that they create. And so because I think like the first rendition of agents that we've seen are these kind of like influencer, like commentary, like content producing agents, I think that makes a lot of sense as like agents that we'll continue to see iterations of. I think different form factors are probably like the lowest hanging fruit here, where, a lot of it's like obviously like written commentary. How do we move into more audio and visual types of agents? And I think that's something that a year from now, we could be like saying things look somewhat similar, but the agents have become more capable and they're just able to do more things.
Interesting. So, I mean, I think that's like a pretty decent transition into NFTs, kind of along the lines of Botto, generative art. So I know that a lot of you guys, I mean, both of you guys have talked about this and written about this, to a certain extent. Where do you guys see like, okay, let's just start with PFP NFTs. Where do you see the market for that right now? I mean, we've had a lot of interesting developments recently, like with Pudgy Penguins launching their token, and we're starting to see a little bit of a revival. Obviously, Ordinals did very well at the beginning of the year. Like, what interests you guys about that sector, and like interesting things that you've seen throughout the year that you thought were notable?
I mean, I think from the market perspective, obviously NFTs have experienced like less trading volume over the past year, but NFTs are like a fundamental primitive that are not going away. I think some of the things that have been interesting experiments over the year have been things like 404s and experimenting with like more liquid types of NFTs. I think gaming continues to be like an area ripe for NFT experimentation and adoption. And then I'd say just broadly speaking, the other two categories that are really interesting. One continues to just be like status symbols or art. And then additionally, like intellectual property, those types of, marketplaces, things for like collectibles have also like seen adoption over the past coming months. I think Courtyard, the like Pokemon cards collectible marketplace, did almost 9 million volume in November. And so we're starting to see upticks in, like purely digital goods. But I think that will obviously expand as more people experiment with like how they can use NFTs for more complex pieces of IP.
I was going to quickly add, I don't have like too much on the PFP side, and like I think a lot of the most interesting ways that we could see an NFT be used, to Mason's point about it being like a general standard that isn't isolated to any one use case, we haven't really seen take off. Like I definitely, if you asked me in March, I would have thought, something interesting out of the 404 standard would have like come out, didn't really materialize. With the AI thing, I would have thought you would have had like some AI NFT game thing kind of come out. Hasn't really materialized. So yeah, I'm not really too sure on that front.
So I actually just published an article about PFP NFTs and just kind of how they accrue value. So, I mean, I branch it, frame it in three different ways. I view them as status symbols, I view them as productive assets, and then community memberships. I think one of the big topics that has been going through these NFT communities as they start to make revenue off the IP is, how does this accrue back to holders? And so you see like Pudgies is, okay, we're going to share, a certain part of the NFTs from toy sales with them. It's like 5% or something like that. And then you can, go on Overpass and try to license it. And then so you see all these other NFT collections saying like, okay, well, why can't we do that? Or like, what's in it for us? So when you actually break that down, the amount of money that's being accrued from that like internal value is actually very, very small compared to these other things like status symbols, community memberships. And you see like one of the reasons that Pudgies was so huge and also Milady's was they were just getting airdrops from everyone, right? So like that is factored into the value of these things. So, I mean, I think it's interesting going forward with Pudgies dropping this token. That's obviously another big part of internal value accrual. And it's kind of bringing up the rest of the market. And you have these projects like Azuki, they're launching Anime Chain, right? Doodles is making the Doodle Studio. So I'm interested, and I'd love to get your guys' take on this, is like, do you think that launching a fungible token, like A, how does it impact communities? B, like, how is this going to impact the NFT sector as a whole? And then also a little bit tangential, but like, do you think we'll see the same sort of price action that we saw before where all the NFTs go up and there's a huge sector narrative? Or do you think it will be these projects that are really like in the trenches working on the IP that will be just select outperformers?
I mean, personally, I think you've already seen consolidation within like the PFP space, and the teams that have like obviously come out on the other side, of the bear market stronger, the ones who were building during the bear. And so Pudgies is a great example of just creating additional value. I think that if you're planning on building an IP brand via NFTs, you need to do some of those more traditional things, whether that's like sponsor content, try to get your like license into a like merchandise or toy store or some type of like actual material value, because all of that contributes to like the overall IP. To answer your question on like, where does that take the NFT market from here? I don't know. I think like there's one future of the world in which like it recatalyzes some NFT activity, but at the same point in time, like now if you think of like Pudgies, like there's kind of a like multi-stack model where you have the NFT value, now have like the token. They're also building like their own chain with like Abstract. And so I think it's unclear that other teams will like follow a similar playbook, because I think it's hard to replicate, that just from the NFT collection.
Yeah, I would definitely double down on the consolidation point. It kind of mirrors what we saw with altcoins in general, right? Like a lot of the stuff that went manic in 2021, a lot of it doesn't survive 2022. A few of them kind of come out of it 2023, 2024, still around, still solid, and are now doing well going into 2025. Seems similar.
Yeah, wanted to hop over to ordinals for a bit and get your guys' thoughts on that. Given that, they had a big run up earlier in the year, while Bitcoin was also having a nice run up. Do you see interest kind of returning to that sector now that Bitcoin has, broken the 100K mark? Or are ordinals more something that, we're kind of a lasting fad? I know you've talked about just like the technological aspects of a lot of the NFTs on EVM chains and that sort. Whereas, right now in their current state, ordinals are more just static JPEGs. So yeah, wondering what you guys think will be the future for ordinals over maybe the next year or the rest of the cycle.
I mean, I think it's definitely possible that this whole narrative of, the same ETH NFT narrative from 2021 could just repeat in a remixed way, like on ordinals. I think the jury is still out on whether or not that will actually happen. I don't think I have a super strong view. If anything, even though it's bad for my bags to say this, like it's probably looking less likely than more likely as things stand today. But the thing about NFTs or, in general, including ordinals, is that it can all change so quickly, right? You go look at like summer 2021 OpenSea volume, it looks like there's a big spike and it's kind of dying out, and then the volume like 10x's in the span of a month, right? So all it takes is one big sale to reverse the course, and things can get really crazy really quickly.
Yeah. I mean, my personal view of ordinals has just been that obviously they don't have the same like level of programmability. And so like, what does that make them? It makes them status symbols. It makes them collectibles. And I think that partners with Bitcoin really well as like the, most secure, most decentralized blockchain network. When I think of like what happens to ordinals, I mean, I have no idea, but one thing that I would say is potentially an interesting catalyst would be just the resurgence of DeFi and Bitcoin. We're going to have a bunch of Bitcoin L2s launched. That's going to catalyze a lot more activity on those chains denominated in Bitcoin. And so, every cycle, whether it's like Ethereum run up, that ends up translating into like NFT art, sold token initial run up that ends up, translating into like PFP mania on the chain initially. It's possible that you could have some sort of catalyst from broader Bitcoin L2 DeFi activity into ordinals. So, I mean, I think that would be like the steel man for do ordinals come back or how do they come back?
Do you guys think that we see the same sort of like rotation into NFTs in the sense that it kind of goes from like wealth effect on one specific chain into it? Or do you think that kind of like now that we're at the point, chain is becoming more and more abstracted away, right? Like people don't necessarily like care sometimes like where the money's being made, and it's not being made in that same kind of like concentrated way by chain necessarily. So do you guys think that's still like a catalyst, the ecosystem wealth effect, or do you think it has more to do with like a sector wealth effect, or I don't know, like what sort of kicks that off?
My hypothesis is that like while that is sometimes a potential, like for NFTs to see like revitalization, like the meta has to change. Like the reason that retail or average like crypto consumers want to trade meme coins today is because it's just like a better attention game. And NFTs were a great attention game last cycle. I would imagine that if we saw a broader volume uptick, it would probably come from like a different form factor. And so whether that is IP, whether that is some new type of like token standard, those are things that like I look at rather than just trying to follow like a wealth effect in an ecosystem.
Just to pivot a little bit, I know, Kel, you wrote some really interesting stuff about Blinks this year. And admittedly, I'm not super on top of it. So I would just love to get your opinion on like what you've seen with Blinks, what your Blinks thesis is, and how you see it evolving into 2025.
Yeah, so just for a high level overview, Blinks allows you to, if you have a Solana wallet on like your laptop or whatever, you could like take actions directly on like third party sites. So let's say, you're scrolling Twitter and like this weird guy, Kel, he just posted about these AI coins, and like you want to go short his AI coins or whatever. Like you could do that directly through Twitter. And so my whole idea was that if, these proliferate, it reduces the friction to take an action a lot, and also widens the amount of places a user could take an action. And so the result in theory would be that, Solana usage would be way up, protocols on Solana usage would be way up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think where it's fallen short so far is that it's still fairly inaccessible. You need to go into like special settings in your wallet and enable this kind of stuff. And a lot of people, don't want to necessarily do something like that, like with a main wallet that they're using. There's so many people who get drained clicking links on Twitter and all this kind of stuff. Now, they have their ways of protecting against that, but I think those fears, regardless of whether or not they're founded or unfounded, are real. And then on top of that, the accessibility from a UX standpoint is still not really there. So the end result is that there's been a lot of cool experimentation and stuff that I would classify as like proof of concept kind of thing, but ultimately the usage is not quite there yet.
A lot of that. I think that the form factor just has to get easier to use. Yeah, to Kel's point, it's just like harder. And I think you see this not only with blinks, but with like Farcaster frames. Like frames are more, I don't know the data if they're like more utilized than blinks, but like they're utilized in context of Farcaster because people already have a wallet connected. Now, if you fast forward that and everyone in Twitter had a wallet connected and Blinks was like super easy to use, then I think there'd be like a ton of adoption. But again, there's still that like additional friction.
Are there any projects in specific that you are interested in Blinks, or potential use cases that you think would be something that if someone built would be, get mass adoption?
I don't know if there's anything I've seen so far. I've always thought this idea of, we've tried to do this crypto gaming thing many times with middling success in general. But to me, it feels like it would work a lot better if a game could be built on top of an interface that people already use, almost at a very, people always talk about how crypto is the best MMORPG in the world and all this kind of stuff. Like, people already say these things, but there's no actual game other than, swap tokens. So if you could build something like that into, I don't know what the forum would look like or what the game would be, but I think there's some mechanism there that could work.
Telegram mini apps are like one potential rendition of that, where you have like a wallet, natively in Telegram, and then, the game is just like a pop-up mini app window. That to me seems like an underexplored format for crypto games, as well as just like other types of like simple crypto applications. You could imagine like payments also being like really, really popular in that type of format.
Mason, would you mind like diving a little bit deeper into the Telegram gaming sector? Because that was huge this year. Obviously, we saw like Cambrian explosion of mini apps being developed, games being developed. It strikes me as it's died down a little bit, but I'm not sure. I might just not be super on top of it. Is that an area that you've checked out and like have opinions on in terms of the direction of it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Telegram is obviously what probably second to Twitter in terms of like crypto user overlap adoption. And so I think you have a user base that already kind of already like lives in that application. Some of like the first type of like usage we saw was just like Telegram trading bots. And then obviously that has evolved into some of these mini apps or like clicker games, the games like Catizen, where they're like these very like simple kind of like mindless games that people can play, like more Candy Crush style. But those are like a very popular form factor in terms of like the gaming world. I think what that has was similar to a lot of different ecosystems. It, brings in like this initial user activity, this initial speculation, and that kind of starts to kick off the flywheel of more activity within that ecosystem. And so more than anything, I've seen like those initial games as a bootstrapping mechanism for the Telegram and the Ton ecosystem. But there's definitely an opportunity to build more robust games because you just have such great distribution access in that user base.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember I think it was the CEO of Animoca this year said that every crypto app's going to have a Telegram mini like counterpart to it. I don't know how true that's going to be, but I can see from a distribution standpoint, if you're a big game, you have a certain amount of player base, but you're trying to get more distribution into another audience, Telegram mini game's a perfect thing to pair with that, right?
Yeah, or it even makes sense if you're like a wallet. Telegram obviously has a native wallet, but it's not as integrated into just like the broader like DeFi activity. Like you could imagine Uniswap or Phantom or MetaMask or any front end wanting to similarly launch its own interface within Telegram.
That's actually, I wanted to touch on that for a minute because I think, Mason, I think you wrote on this in terms of the fat app thesis versus fat wallet thesis. And this is for both of you guys, but like, where do you see wallets going in 2025? Like, I mean, it's not something a ton of people talk about. It's not the sexiest thing, but I want to get your guys' opinions on that and how that relates to the consumer experience.
I mean, one thesis I have is just like the broader trend towards verticalization. And so applications wanting to own their user base. What does that mean? It means that applications either that are existing either like start to move up to own the user at the wallet layer, or conversely, what we see a lot of new applications do is just launch a wallet from the jump, whether that's using like an embedded wallet like Privy, or rolling their own.
Yeah, Privy ships like crazy. I remember like coming in and when I was first starting this, I was like looking at consumer infrastructure and it was like every single other day it was like, yeah, we ship this for social, we ship this for gaming. It's pretty amazing how that's developed.
Yeah, I'm curious, Justin, or Chris, do you buy the fat app thesis?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that the layer closest to the user, I think will accrue the most value at the end of the day. I think that you're able to kind of dictate take rates at that point. I don't have like a super strong opinion. Justin, I don't know if you have anything there.
Yeah, I don't have a super strong opinion, but I do think that a lot of the value does accrue to the app. I mean, we've seen like with Pump.Fun, just how much they've generated in fees, with just the massive amounts of users, and they're able to kind of reach just a wide range of users as well. And so in that sense, a lot of the value does end up accruing to the app.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of where I think things kind of end up in the end state, I think it's fairly clear that application layer stuff is far more undervalued than, like, if you want to take a bet on one or the other, right? Like, the apps are at an inflection point where they're getting a lot of usage, but they don't have the same level of venture funding as the infrastructure and the protocols had for the past like 10 years. So it's like, all right, which one is probably going to accrue more value, at least through 2025? Like, probably the apps, right? And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
I think it's hard. It's also hard because like from a venture perspective, right? Like so many apps die. Like I feel like we have this like, thing in our head where like, oh, we just fund all these apps and we're going to have this amazing app ecosystem. But it's like, at the end of the day, like it's like a business, right? Like 95% of these things are going to die. So I don't know, like Mason, from your perspective as a VC, like how do you think about this when you're investing in apps versus infrastructure? Yeah. I mean, like kind of where do you think the venture is going in this space?
Yeah, I would posit a thesis of like why have we seen more investment in infrastructure over the years, and like really there's like two reasons. One is because we've seen high returns there in L1s, or in just like protocol layers, and the second is that a lot of the like even the apps that have been successful in crypto today typically have some type of kind of infrastructure around them. And so like if you think of like Uniswap as an app or a protocol, like it kind of blends the two. And so you've seen a lot of investment there versus at the like true application layer of the stack. It's been harder in crypto to build moats there because like you're plugging into a lot of open protocols. And so you end up having you've had less defensibility historically. I think that ultimately we will see more value accrue to the application layer of the stack, but it is admittedly also harder to make an investment there because like there's going to be so many more shots on goal in terms of teams building there compared to building at the infrastructure layer of the stack. And so I think a lot of investors take a picks and shovels approach because the world in which like you can see that becoming an important protocol is a little simpler than imagining like the application that's going to end up like dominating consumer finance, for example.
Hard pivot. Oh, what are you guys thinking about gaming in general? I know, like Kelly, you had a great piece that I read when I was doing my Pirate Nation piece about fully on-chain games. Do you see that like still kind of like becoming a thing in 2025 now that the infrastructure is scaling that we can actually have these fully on-chain games that have a Web2 kind of game experience? Or do you like where's your head at with that?
I still think it's a very interesting idea that can be compelling, packaged in the right form, but is it going to be in 2025 that happens? 2026, 2027, 28, 29, 30? Like, I have no idea. Ultimately, like, as a meta point, there's a general move from the analog world to the digital world. We have like Bitcoin is basically a video game currency that just has certain kind of rules that are enforced in the physical world, and it's worth, trillions of dollars. So I still think this whole Ready Player One kind of thing that maybe Axie gave us a preview of, like, will happen, but I have no idea on the timing of that.
I think like one of the breakout successes of this year was Off the Grid, right? In terms of being an actual crypto game that has achieved scale, wide adoption. I think simultaneously that's kind of in like the AAA game studio camp. And then on the other side of the camp, you have the spectrum of more like simple to play games. And like maybe an example of that that's seen success over the past year is something like Friend Pet on base, where it's like a very simple game, but it's also like, generated a lot in fees, generated a lot in high user base, high transaction volume. And so like, that's kind of like the indie game side that has been successful. And then you're starting to see things in the middle as well that have started to gain more user adoption, things like Infinity Gods, which are taking like, mobile gaming approaches. And so I think there's a ton that 2024 saw in the gaming space that are like showing these signs of success of that category. And it's possible that like that could be a real like flag bearer for consumer crypto in 2025.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think gaming is another sector that maybe we don't give enough credit to. I mean, Off the Grid was huge, right? Like you had, major Web2 streamers talking about this, convincing people that blockchain is like the way to go with gaming. You had like 800,000 daily active users. Like that's a real success, right? And like that's coming up against, I think Call of Duty 6 was coming out like 2 weeks later, right? So, I mean, I think that these things have been very impressive. And even with indie games like Pixels, right? Like they reached they reached 1 million daily active addresses. Obviously super hard to parse out bot activity there, but like it does seem like we're seeing some real adoption within the gaming sector. I know you mentioned like mobile, kind of like more indie games, AAA games. I think in general, where we can start with Mason and we'll go to Cal, like where do you see the form factor of the successful breakout games? Like, is it going to be indie developers, AAA, mobile, PC? Like, do you have any thoughts around where that's going to come from?
I think we'll see success across all genres. I think we'll see, obviously building a AAA game, it just requires a lot more capital. And so I think we'll probably see less success there and more success in like the mobile indie type of game studios. But those can still be like, multi-billion-dollar gaming studios, regardless of like where we see success. I think like there will be like one common trait amongst them, and that is they're going to have these in-game economies with these tradable assets, because at the end of the day, like that is what crypto enables in these games, that brings like more autonomy to the users and brings like an additional layer of just like excitement to the game.
Yeah, I don't have any strong opinions. I think it's just hard to tell. Quite frankly, I don't think I've done my enough due diligence to like have earned the right to have a strong opinion for what I can say. So I feel like I would just be throwing a dart. But to give you one, I would say mobile. I guess I think a lot of the chain ecosystems have had big pushes for mobile. So maybe, out of some kind of hackathons there or something like that, you could see something come out.
I would say mobile, like just more broadly in crypto, is underutilized. Like it's clear that crypto will be more mobile in the future. Like that's just like the way that most people interact with the internet nowadays. We've started to see some applications just in like traditional trading, like Moonshot, for example, provide like a pretty simple interface. I think we're going to continue to see more like actual native iOS, native Android type applications, whether it's in gaming, whether it's in trading, or other new types of like consumer applications.
Do you think that like every app like a Uniswap will eventually have an iOS application, like / like needs to have an iOS application? How do you think that the mobile kind of affects these, computer-based front ends that we now interact with?
Personally, I think that this comes back to like wanting to own the end user. And so I do see a lot of applications pushing to launch a mobile application. There will be obviously some exceptions where, it's true infrastructure and you're just controlling like liquidity, for example. So like you can imagine a bridging layer, like they probably don't need their end user application, at least today, so long as their liquidity remains dominant.
Seems like something that makes sense to do, right? Especially if you have a lot of resources, if you're a successful team that has some kind of consumer relationship, you can see like how many of these people are, signing into a wallet through like a MetaMask browser and doing all this other kind of stuff. Like you might as well just make an app at that point, right? So
yeah, I completely agree. Is there anything here to touch on with agents too? like, agents like kind of interacting with the mobile experience more so than the, laptop experience? Because I know that like Solana just released, I forget the name of it, but they have basically, I think it's like kind of their virtuals for on Solana. And then they toss that over to Solana phone holders to get access to it. I'm tossing darts too. I really don't know, but I don't know if you guys had any opinions on that. And
I mean, I personally haven't seen a ton in that category. I think agents just need to get better first before like we can bring them mobile.
To touch a little bit more on agents, I mean, with Farcaster, we saw Warpcast agents have become, rampant on there. Twitter, we're seeing agents become rampant. How do you think specifically with the social experience that we have with crypto, maybe like specifically decentralized social, like where do you see that playing out in 2025? And like what will it look like as an end user using something like Warpcast and interacting with these agents?
I don't really have like a hard opinion there. I think that we've started to see like some interesting experimentation with agents in, like the Farcaster ecosystem. It makes sense to me that if you're building a new type of social network, you need to, by definition, build something that's like a differentiated experience. And so like one of the things that is different today versus like the social networks of the past is agents. And so I could see that being like a primitive that is used, but I don't really have any like clear perspective on where that goes.
We've gone back and forth a lot on decentralized social platforms and their usage and stuff. Right now, for me, like the jury's definitely out. I don't know if like people interacting with agents via Warpcast is going to be a major theme more so than via Twitter, let's say, or via Telegram, or just agents interacting on chain or with each other. I'm happy to be kind of upside surprise on this, but yeah, that's kind of my tilt here.
Yeah, Kel, I think it gets to the question of like, should crypto be like front and center or should it be like in the back end? And in a lot of, let's say like the use cases that we've seen success, like it's that are non like trading focus is like in the back end is maybe better. And so like, yeah, we've seen agents on Twitter. Like that makes sense. Like that's where people are. That's where people want to interact. Like stable coins, like another example of like something that like has outright consumer adoption, product market fit. But most of the apps that you see stable coins in, like the user probably doesn't even know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing that in gaming too, right? Like off the grid, just a game.
Another
right?
example. Yep.
What are your guys' hot takes 2025? Spiciest take and why?
My bags to infinity.
My bags too. All of our bags. I mean, I don't know how hot it is, but I think that gaming will surprise us in 2025. And I think there's a lot of mispricings in the gaming sector in terms of tokens and where they stand relative to other tokens. I think that there's going to be a lot more adoption there. And I don't think it's necessarily going to take another AAA game. I think that as more people come on chain and as games become more appealing to a wider demographic of people, I think there's untapped areas like, for example, Brazil, India, areas that we haven't really focused on traditionally. And then obviously Southeast Asia is huge. Sui is targeting Southeast Asia super hard. Mobile is huge in Southeast Asia. So I think we're going to see a lot of surprising adoption within crypto games. And then I think once the pendulum of attention swings that way, we're going to realize that there are some egregious mispricings and assets will re-rate relative to one another.
For me, I think that one of these agents will become like a mainstay in just the retail outside of crypto in terms of their attention. It'll grow on, somewhere like TikTok or somewhere like Instagram. I don't know what form it'll take, but it'll be something where, maybe it's an agent making music on TikTok or creating art on Instagram. I think we'll see something like that spawn out of this AI agent meta. And these people on TikTok, on Instagram, they're not going to know that this is some crypto agent. They're just going to see this AI agent, this AI, maybe it be an anime figure or something. I capture all their attention, go really viral. But yeah, I can't really speak on what sort of medium it'll be. But I think, as these agents naturally progress, one of them will be able to really develop and escape kind of the chamber of crypto that a lot of these agents are popular in.
I think that it's very possible. I mean, some of the types of creators on TikTok do like nothing. It's just like content posting. And so there's a world in which like an agent could just like be a curator and still be like very popular.
Yeah, I guess my pick is kind of similar to Baba's pick, which is that an agent will deploy some protocol that will go to like $1 billion plus valuation, which would be pretty insane. So that's like if that happens, like that, I feel like that's sufficiently spicy.
What type of protocol do you imagine them?
I really have no idea. It could be some DeFi crazy, like something, I don't know. Like it could be, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of blank space and a lot of room for the creativity of these agents to just expand with the underlying models just increasing in in capability. And there's just so much desire for like to invest in AI. A lot of money has been locked up in zero user AI companies that are super specialized, and you know they're worth billions. This is like a very liquid version of the same thing. So that's why I'm like, all right, you know, something could happen here, and that's just my pick. I don't really know what form it's going to take, but it's one of those you'll know it when you see it kind of things.
Well, I mean, I thought what was really interesting, I think you posted this a few days ago, the IC, like the agent ICOs, like having the agent as the
Exactly. Yep.
founder. So, I mean, if that takes off, that's totally possible, right? Did you find that argument? What were your thoughts on that, Kel, by the way? Like, did you find that argument compelling?
But the AI ICO thing,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think to a certain degree, it does hit on a lot of the prevailing sentiments in the market today, where like people are disillusioned with, and like this isn't every founder, right? Like it might not even be the majority of founders, but there are a lot of founders who are coming out, kind of putting together some half-assed projects, you know, getting the right VCs or the right market makers, blah, 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 and like just kind of pushing something out with the sole intention of, you know, taking the money that they'll get from that. And so if you have some supercharged AI that's way smarter than me, at least, I don't know about these founders, but it's definitely smarter than me. And it also doesn't have the same incentive structure to basically just push slow rugs, then who knows what it'll build, right? You know, like rather, if you run that simulation 1,000 times, what's the probability that 1 out of 1,000 creates the next Uniswap or the next Hyperliquid, whatever the case may be? Like, I don't know, 1% maybe, considering that's like one, right? You know, it's not like it's going to take 10 years to find out. Like, we'll know pretty soon.
This is going to be the Cambrian explosion of consumer apps. We're just going to let these guys go rapid cycle till we get some hits.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. I would imagine like what's an agent going to launch? Like it's probably going to be like not a protocol, but like just a token, like a meme coin. So I think that that's maybe the more likely outcome that I see happening. But I'd be all for if agents started to become founders and build stuff. I think that'd be really cool.
That'd be some real sci-fi.
It would be.
Real sci-fi.
I don't think we're there yet. So, but you never know. Technology advances faster than you can typically imagine.
I know that we got to wrap kind of soon, but I also just wanted to ask you, Mason. So in the hypothetical world where we have these AI agents as founders, from a VC perspective, how would that change your investing? Like, you know, investing in people versus product. Like, how would you think about investing in an AI founder?
That's a good question. I imagine it would kind of vary on how it's done. I feel like if you had found like AI agents that were builders, like you'd probably have much more permissionless fundraising. And so it'd probably look more something like DAOs.fund than it would like a traditional, you know, founder raising capital. It would be really, really sad to get rejected from an AI agent trying to invest in them. That would definitely bruise the ego a bit.
I think on that note of being rejected by AIs, this isn't going where you think it's going, by the way. Andy, the Truth Terminal dev, at a certain point, he like released the like you could talk to the back rooms yourself kind of thing, and I was like, all right, let me go check this out. Let me see what I've invested my hard-earned dollars into. And so I'm like talking to Truth Terminal, just like asking it random philosophy questions. And at a certain point, I was like, you don't really seem that engaged. Like, honestly, that's kind of bullish, said Bob Moore.
It's a true companion AI. It rejects you.
Yeah, it's really the Truth Terminal for real. But that was funny. So,
Chris, Justin, what else are you excited about in 2025?
I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting stuff with PNFT projects. Like, I think that some of these companies are just getting started. Like, truly, what Doodles is doing is incredible in entertainment and media. What Azuki's doing with Anime Chain, Pudgy's obviously been crushing it for a while. And then a ton of projects like that aren't really on people's radar, like Forgotten Wizards, Claynosaurs, like, they're all doing really, really cool things that I think people will become more aware of in 2025, especially if we see some price action that captures people's attention into the space. So I'm really excited to see where these projects take their IP, not just 2025, but I mean, even talking like 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, like what are these Web3 native brands that were kind of like originally funded through an IP ICO? Like where are these going to go, right? And like, how's that going to impact the future of brand building outside of Web3? So I'm excited for that for 2025 and just excited for that for like the next 5 years, decade,
Yeah, I think as an extension of kind of the AI agent stuff, I'm still pretty interested in what's going on with AI art. I think that's kind of somewhere in the NFT space that's early in development. There's more artists experimenting with different types of AI art, different types of formats. And so I think as just attention stays on AI, and as more people get interested in what's going on with the intersection of AI and crypto, I think interest kind of flows over there and it'll help onboard more artists to create this type of art, push the boundaries of what's possible. And then hopefully, some of these get some notable recognition. I know there are a few right now, but I think as AI grows, both within crypto and outside of crypto, we're going to have some just really great art coming from this sector.
Yeah, I totally believe that. I mean, the foundation of NFTs was really generative art, right? It was with, Robbie Barat, it was with art blocks. And so, obviously like agents and AI have gotten much more complex, and the art can be like even more dynamic nowadays. So that is also something I'm excited for.
It's going to be so cool too, seeing how this interacts with just human artists. People who are making their art, but then use AI as that tool to add an extra creative layer, like bounce ideas off of. Like, to me, that's like, I'm a musician originally. So to me, that gets me like really hyped up, just seeing how these are going to affect like the general creative landscape moving forward. I think, who was that? Did Natalie from Electric Capital had a really cool piece on that? I think she talked a little bit about it. Yeah. I'm super excited about that. Mason, did you give a hot take, or are we waiting on the hot take?
I mean, I don't know that I have like a really hot take. I guess like my hot take would be that as we look at the Solana landscape, I think we're going to see a lot more applications decide to fragment and verticalize their own block space. And so as I don't know if this is totally a 2025 thing, but I think we'll start to see more applications there realize that owning their own chain can be really beneficial. Obviously, we'll see that in things like gaming, but I think we'll even start to see that in DeFi, or any application that really has like a sufficient user base.
Yep. It all comes back around. Yeah, I love that. I love that meme. What is it? It's about like someone's like, I want to build an app. Oh, I need my own app space. Okay, now I'll build my own blockchain. And it comes back. Cool. Yeah, man. I totally agree with that thesis as well. Anything you guys that we missed that you guys want to talk about, or parting words for 2025?
Good luck out there. That's all I got. We're going to need it. Up or down, we're going to need it. I mean, if things are explosive in either way, that's the hardest environment to be in, right? You're either making or losing tons of money in very short order that clouds your judgment significantly. So I would say, everyone cheers for when the top arrives. Everyone wants to be there and belong, but no one really sits and thinks through like, what is it psychologically going to do to me?
We're just all going to sell at the perfect time. So
yeah, exactly. There you go. So you ain't got to worry about it, right?
Top and then rebuy the Pico bottom, and then we're good.
I think there's never been a better time for crypto, both on the innovation front as well as on just like user adoption. Like things are really setting up, whether it's like with stable coins, whether it's like more, broader consumer adoption. I think it's going to be a really exciting year in 2025.
Yep, completely agree. All right, guys, thanks for going over. I appreciate it. And this was awesome getting to talk, hang out for a little bit. Nice to meet you guys. Well, Kel, we met one time super briefly, but nice to meet you too, Mason.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Always happy to support the Messari fam.
Yeah, 100%.